Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and I'm here today on our set with Gigi Khalsa, a fellow associate editor at Quilters Newsletter. And this is a little bit, this is the first time we're sitting down to do an interview with one of our coworkers, but the reason is that Gigi is our April-May 2015 cover girl.
Well, not me, my quilt.
Your quilt,
yes.
Called Impulse, and we're going to be talking about that in the next episode that we're coming up next. But right now we want to talk about you, and we wanted to find out more about your process, and then we'll talk some about these gorgeous quilts of yours that are here on the set with us. So welcome,
Great.
Gigi.
Thank you very much.
It's exciting. So really quick, so you were born in Seattle,
That's
correct?
right.
And your parents' work took you to various spots, correct?
Yeah, I grew up a lot of places, overseas and in the U.S., lived in a lot of states. So yeah, moved around a lot as a child.
And then you ended up in Los Angeles when you were ready for high school?
Yes, so when I wanted to go to high school, I wanted to sort of stay in the same place, and my dad found the LA County High School for the Arts, and I applied and got in, and so that was great.
It's a school that I heard, I'm from Los Angeles as well, it's a school I heard about, but I didn't attend. So they have a visual arts program there.
Yes,
It's not
so
just
I went for
arts.
drawing and painting, yes.
Okay, and what kind of mediums were you into at the time?
Mostly drawing, just pencil and ink, and also watercolor. A little bit of acrylic, but not really.
And were you introduced to textile arts in high school, or it was still all just
It was
fine art
mostly
oriented?
fine art, but I did take a fashion design class when I was in high school, which sort of really sparked my interest in garment making and sewing.
And did you start sewing in high school?
I had sewed a little bit with my mom here and there, but I never really was very, I would say, proficient at it until I went to college. I went to Otis, which is an art school in Los Angeles.
Otis School of Design?
That's right. I majored in fashion design there, and that's where I really learned to sew pretty much everything.
And what kind of garments were you, I mean, I don't know how the concentrations work, so you were working on fashion design or pattern making, because isn't there a pattern making concentration as well? Or?
Not at Otis in particular.
Okay.
You learn everything. You learn pattern making, drafting, sewing, everything from start to finish and how to make a garment. And so I went through that, and I really learned a lot.
And what did you think you were going to do with it?
I did think I was going to go work in the fashion industry, and I did. After I graduated, I went and worked in there in a couple different companies for a little while, but ultimately, I ended up liking school a lot more than I liked actually working.
I see.
There wasn't really much hands-on sewing and stuff when you go to work, so I was a little bit, disillusioned with it, I guess, and ended up doing other stuff for a long time. And until one day I wanted to do some sewing. I didn't really want to do garments because of the fit and that whole thing, so I said, hey, why don't I make a quilt? That seems like fun.
Was there a quilt that you'd seen, or a book, or a program, or anything, or just sort of
my
came
mom,
to you?
It just sort of came to me. When I was in high school, my mom used to make Bargello quilts. She had one book about Bargello quilts, and that's what she made. They were beautiful, but that's really the only exposure to quilts that I had had up till then. So when I decided I wanted to make one, I went to the library, checked out a couple books, and picked a pattern and made it.
Because this was before the internet was a great destination for learning this
stuff.
So.
And even if, even the internet is available, I will still go to the library to look up stuff. That's just how I do.
Okay. And so you sort of, did you take classes? You already had a lot of, obviously, sewing experience. You knew the basics.
I was very confident in my sewing ability, and the only difference really I had to adapt to was the 1/4 inch versus 1/2 inch seam allowance, or 5/8. So once I got that, it was really, I was off and running. It was a very, not a steep learning curve.
Right. You'd already taken care of that piece.
Yes.
and you are already confident in designing. It's just a different
Right. And
dimension. It's flatter.
What I realized when I started making quilts is it sort of took me back to my sort of two-dimensional visual arts background, sort of full circle a little bit, but with a little bit extra, more technique.
I see, I see. So describe for us your first quilt.
It was from a book, I believe. I don't remember the title, but I remember the author's name is Evelyn Sloppy, which I thought was really funny because her quilts were so neat. So I picked a book. It was a modified snowball block, and I just went ahead and made it. It was a lot of fun, and once I finished that, I just had to start another.
Did you do your own quilting?
Yes, I did. I just did very simple stitch in the ditch for the first quilting. Wasn't a whole lot of quilting, nothing fancy or special, but yeah, I got the experience of shoving a huge quilt through the tiny arm of my sewing machine.
Yeah, because you sew still on the same domestic machine that you've had for a long time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I've got a very basic machine, and I do all my quilts on it.
And then did you start designing your own quilts pretty quickly after you made that first one, or did you work
did.
out of other people's patterns for a while?
No, I did that pattern and immediately just started being like, well, what else can I do with this? And so I got out my graph paper and just started designing and just never stopped.
And as far as fabric goes, did you start like shopping at quilt stores, or were you using remnants of garments that you'd made? What kind of fabrics were you using initially?
Initially, yeah, I was using a lot of remnants. I know I did read in the book that I had gotten from the library that you needed to use cotton fabrics, so I didn't do a lot of mixing. But I would buy remnants at Joann's and thrift stores. And when people find out you sew, they want to give you fabric.
That's true.
For some reason.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of that too. And so
Okay.
I just put all that into my quilt.
Okay. And I would imagine because of your fine arts background, I think you have a really wonderful aesthetic sense, and you're very fearless with color, I think, in a way that those of us who maybe came to quilting because of the pretty fabrics are maybe trepidatious about. And that's one of the things I love about your work, is how you use color and how you use fabrics that we don't necessarily think of as pretty fabrics. So for instance, the quilt behind you, your snail trail twist, that's in our Best Tradition with the Twist Quilts special issue, is a great example of that. I mean, none of these are what anybody would really call exciting fabrics.
It's true, yeah, and that was a deliberate choice because I designed the pattern without thinking about the fabrics. So when it came time to plug the fabrics in, I wanted to do something that was sort of a little bit different from the very kind of unusual design that I had. So I chose very, traditional kind of
small scale, calico, floral.
Stuff that people might consider old-fashioned, but I wanted to sort of give it a new context.
Well, you did that. You did that. Well, let's turn our attention to the quilts here on the table in front of us. And this first one here, this is one that you brought to your interview.
I did.
When we interviewed you.
That's right. Yeah, I brought this. This is just an example of one of my designs where I just use very simple shapes. It's really just strips, but the way that you place the color makes the image, and I find that really interesting, and I try and do that a lot in my work.
So it's all pieced in, it's not an applique thing.
Yes, and all it is really just, I've got 18-inch strips, and then I figure out where I need to insert my little black shapes to make the bird, and that's it.
There you go, and this is a pillow.
It's a little pillowcase. And this one is, you may remember this from a workshop that we did a while back, but this is also another example of very simple shapes put together to make an image. And all it is squares and half square triangles, a couple rectangles, and suddenly you have a bouquet of flowers.
Yeah, this was a really fun lesson that you did for us. A couple of videos as well.
And this is one of the more recent quilts that I finished. This one is in Quilters Newsletter's Best Kids Quilt, 2015. And this is an example of a pattern where it's going to look so different depending on what fabrics you use.
Yeah.
And I used very loud, vibrant prints because I like them and I thought it would be fun. But you could do each triangle, a different color in the same print or something and really get different looks. And I'm kind of excited to make a new version of this one with different prints.
Well, I like this one because we thought about it, and I think you did too, for an older child, teenager,
Yes.
for instance. So that you could really customize it with a simple block and customize it with fabrics that particular child, teenager, might
Exactly,
like.
yeah. You could choose theme or colors that they really love, but I do recommend using stripes in these sort of patches because I like the movement that it gives.
And this one is called
A quilt for all seasons.
Yes.
And that's sort of like each one, I was sort of envisioning like spring, summer, fall, winter sort of a thing.
Got it. And this one I love, as we all know. We've talked about this one.
We've talked about this one briefly. This was for Best Fat Quarter quilts.
2014.
Yeah, and this quilt was pretty much exclusively inspired by this fabric line.
Yeah.
I had this stack of fat quarters.
No. We had a stack of fat quarters.
Which I appropriated.
We were sent a bundle of fabrics from Moda, which we get occasionally, and we all salivate over them. And you said, mind if I take these? And I said, all right. Because you will actually probably do something with them, whereas I
was going to do something.
You did something spectacular with them. You really, I love this quilt.
Thank you so much. So it's really just, I'm inspired a lot by fabrics. When I see something and I'm just like, well, what can I do with that? Rather than making a design and plugging fabrics in. That's sort of how I work.
Okay.
And
now this is what I would call a Gigi Khalsa quilt.
this one's pretty out there.
You talk, but it's just, how many people are going to choose these fabrics? There are people who will, but a lot of quilters, we shy away from these types of large prints and just the vibrancy of it,
And everyone should do what appeals to them, of course, but if you have a design wall, it really doesn't hurt to slap all kinds of fabrics up on there and just see what they do for you. Because
so you use a design wall?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Design walls are very
And
important.
that seems to be a recurring theme. Whenever I sit down with somebody who is an artist, not just a quilter, but somebody who comes at it from an art standpoint, they all invariably use a design wall, and not just to kind of as a placeholder, but as an active tool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can sort of imagine what things are going to look like, well, what's this going to look like with this? And you can picture that in your head, but really seeing it up on the wall, there's no replacement for that. And that really sort of gives you a sense of how to move forward.
Okay. So I'm sorry, so tell us really quickly about this one.
This one is just, I had this was a square block. I chopped it in half diagonally. I added some fabric that I found at the thrift store. That's pretty much it. I liked these bright purple flowers with the chartreuse.
Yes. Again, just a really a brave approach to, this is nice and light.
It is, yeah.
It's really light, nice.
And this one, a lot of the stuff that I am bringing today is from Quilters Newsletter special issues, but this one is from the Best Modern Quilt issue. That was in 2014. And this one was, I was interested in triangles, basically. So you'll see the blocks, they're all triangles, just a bunch of different triangles in different proportions and shapes. And I just liked the way that they played with each other, a little push and pull. And then we have these sort of diagonal zigzags going down to just sort of.
And again, a great use of fabric, focusing the solids in the center, and then as you get out toward the edges, you start to notice, maybe at first you don't notice it, but then you get out to the edges and you notice that you're incorporating more of these small scale prints or tonals and things along those lines, or yeah.
Yeah, I know the modern quilt scene really loves solid fabrics, and I do too, of course, but I also love prints. And I think mixing them is a really fun, fresh way to...
What's the name of this quilt again?
What is this called? Modern Camp.
Right.
Yes. And this one's really fun. I recently finished this one, and this was also inspired by the fabric line. I was lucky enough to receive a yard of each of these fabrics, and since there was 3 colorways in each print, I was like, hey, well, what can I do with that? So I sort of figured out dark, medium, light, kind of an idea, And so I've got, my medium here, my light, and my dark, and that sort of goes throughout the entire quilt in each succession of borders.
Jane Sassaman prints?
That's right.
Okay.
And you might notice in here, I actually took the trouble to match.
You sure did.
The prints.
Yeah, if you weren't going to point that out, I wanted to be sure to point that out to people how you matched that up.
I don't know if it was worth it in the end, but it was a lot of fun.
No,
and
it's totally worth it.
I mean,
you could get away without it, but it's just one of those attention to detail aspects that when you find it, it's just like, it's great.
And this was a great one. I practiced my free motion quilting too, which I'm getting better at every day.
You vlogged about that, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm trying to get better, trying to get actually really good, but we'll get there.
We'll get there.
You got to practice.
Yes. And this is what I definitely think of as a Gigi quilt.
This one is too.
So we have these fabric grabs. We'll talk about this really quickly. Fabric grabs when we have fabric that we get sent by companies that we don't need to keep on hand anymore. We keep some of it, and then some of it we take home. Mm-hmm. And we tend to, it's sort of like, give it to Mikey, he hates everything, except you don't hate everything. There's fabric that we see that's just kind of funky or odd, and we think, well, give it to Gigi. She'll know what to do with it, and lo and behold.
Yeah, this isn't the sort of print that I'd see and fall in love with, these little hunters.
Although you didn't get this from a fabric grab. You got this at the thrift store.
I bought this at the thrift store. But a lot of the
Same
fabrics
idea.
in the little squares are from fabric grab,
Mm-hmm.
I have to say. And I just wanted to use it. I got like 3 yards for like $6. I had to buy it.
Up.
So I figured a fun way to use it would just be sort of to break it up, but also see it,
Yes.
a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
And mixing it in with the Irish chain, I think, really just sort of gives it an unusual look, and it kind of reminds me of looking through like leaded glass windows or something.
Uh-huh.
But it was just fun, and it sort of goes from green squares on top down to more brown earth tone squares down here.
And again, these are quilts that you blogged about. People, if you want to read more about them, you can go to the Quilters Newsletter blog and see more details and read more about Gigi's process. She does a great job of blogging about her process and kind of giving you a behind-the-scenes look into how she works and designs. Be sure to join us for our next episode where we're going to talk with her in more detail about impulse. Thanks so much, Gigi.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.